She married the cowboy to save herself, but he had been loving her in silence for years. A true story. Some love stories start with butterflies and first glances, and hearts pounding across a crowded room. This one did not. This one started with a stack of unpaid bills on a kitchen table, a sick mother sleeping down the hall, and a woman named Nora who had run out of options and was too tired to be ashamed about it. Nora was 34 years old when she drove to her neighbor's ranch and asked him to marry her. She drove slowly, the way you do when you are rehearsing something out loud and you need the road to last a little longer. She had the words arranged in a certain order. She had thought through every version of how he might say no, and she had a response prepared for each one. What she had not prepared for was the version where he said yes, quietly, without hesitation, and then offered her more coffee. His name was Cole Hargrove. He was 38 years old, a cattle rancher on the eastern edge of a small Texas county, and he had been in love with Nora for 17 years. She did not know this. In fairness to her, he had worked very hard to make sure she did not know. Let's go back to the beginning. Not the dramatic beginning, not the part with the bills or the proposal or the coffee. Let's go further back, to the summer when everything actually started, even though neither of them would have called it that at the time. Nora grew up in the same county. Her family had a small piece of land that her father farmed on the side while he worked at the grain co-op during the week. She was the eldest of 3 kids, the one who got good grades and organized the school fundraisers and who everyone assumed would move to the city and do something impressive. She did move, eventually. She went to college in Fort Worth, got a teaching degree, came back to take a job at the elementary school, and then, in her late 20s, married a man named Dennis who was charming and unreliable in equal measure. The marriage lasted 4 years. There were no ugly scenes, no betrayals of the dramatic kind that make for good gossip. Dennis was simply someone who was always on the edge of leaving, and one day he just stopped coming back. Nora was 31 when she filed the paperwork. She did it calmly. She told her mother it was fine. She told everyone it was fine. She probably even believed it, mostly. Cole had known Nora since they were teenagers, the way you know someone in a small county. You see them at the feed store, and at church and at school events, and you know the shape of their life even if you have never had a real conversation. The real conversation happened the summer she was 19, when her father was putting up new fence on the south side of his property, and Cole came over to help, because that is what people did out there. Nora was home from her first year of college, and she spent 2 days hauling posts and passing tools, and talking about everything and nothing in that easy way people talk when they are working with their hands and not paying attention to what their mouths are saying. Cole noticed things that summer. The way she laughed at her own jokes before she finished telling them. The way she would stop and look out at the land for a moment, just a few seconds, like she was taking a photograph with her eyes. The way she handed him the wire cutters, without being asked, because she had been watching how he worked, and she already knew what he needed next. He was 23 and he had never been good with words, and he knew, in the clear, unglamorous way that some people just know things, that saying something out loud would ruin it. She was going back to college at the end of the summer. She had plans, big ones. He was a man with dirt under his fingernails and a ranch to run, and no particular talent for talking about feelings. So he said nothing. He went home that evening and told himself it would pass. It did not pass. Over the next 17 years, Cole watched Nora's life from a respectful and completely unexplained distance. He watched her come back to town and start teaching. He watched her date a few people and then marry Dennis. He watched the marriage end. He watched her move back into her parents' house when her father got sick, and then stay on after her father died, because her mother was already starting to have trouble with her memory. He sent flowers when her father passed. He helped her mother's neighbor fix a water pump the following winter, and did not tell anyone why he had gone out of his way to do it. He left firewood near the property line every November, which Nora's mother always assumed came from the church. He knew that. He never corrected her. Nora's mother was named Dorothy. To everyone who loved her. She was a round-faced woman with white hair she wore in a braid and an opinion about everything, which she shared freely and without apology. She had grown up on this land, married on this land, buried her husband on this land, and she intended to die here too, in that matter-of-fact way that old Texans talk about death, like it is just another thing on the calendar. The Alzheimer's diagnosis came when Dot was 71. The doctor used careful language and gave them pamphlets with soft colors on the covers. Nora sat in the car afterwards and stared at the steering wheel for a while. Then she drove home, made supper, and started making lists. That was how Nora handled things. She made lists. She made lists about medication schedules and doctor appointments and finances, and for a while the lists held everything together. The trouble was money. It had always been the trouble, really. The farm had a mortgage that her father had refinanced years ago, under terms that were not favorable, and the note was held by a man named Ray Pruitt, who owned a lot of things in that county, and was not unkind but was also not patient. Nora's teaching salary had been enough when she was covering just her own expenses. After she moved back home and her mother stopped being able to manage finances alone, it was not enough. Not even close. She picked up a tutoring job on weekends. She sold some of her father's old equipment. She applied for every assistance program she could find and got approved for some of them, which helped, but not enough. The number in her bank account kept being smaller than the number in her notebook. She would lie awake some nights doing the arithmetic in her head, as if running the same calculation enough times might eventually produce a different answer. It never did. The call from Ray Pruitt came on a Thursday in October. He was not unkind about it. He explained that the note was 6 months past due and that he had let it go longer than he should have, and that he was going to need resolution within 30 days. Nora thanked him and hung up and sat at the kitchen table in the quiet of the morning, listening to her mother's radio playing in the other room. She thought about selling. She had thought about it before. But selling meant moving Dot, and moving Dot meant uprooting the last piece of solid ground the woman had. Her kitchen, her garden, the window where she watched the birds, the bedroom where she had slept for 40 years. The doctors had been clear about disruption. A person with Alzheimer's depends on familiarity, the way the rest of us depend on air. You take it away, and they start to lose pieces of themselves faster. Nora was not going to do that. She had decided that a long time ago, in a quiet, private way, the way you decide the things that really matter, not out loud, not with ceremony, just with a kind of bone-deep certainty that makes the decision feel less like a choice and more like a fact. So she sat there and she thought. And the thinking, eventually and reluctantly, led her to Cole Hargrove. She had known Cole her whole life, the way she had known everything in that county, as background, as scenery, as the name on the mailbox at the end of the dirt road that ran along the east edge of her mother's property. He had been a quiet presence her whole adult life. She knew he was steady. She knew he was decent. She had seen him over the years in small ways that decent people show themselves. The firewood, the time he spent 2 hours helping old Mr. Talbot find a calf that had gotten through a broken fence without being asked. The way he always showed up to volunteer at the county fair and stood in the back where nobody would thank him. She did not think about what she felt about Cole. That was not the category she put him in. She thought about what she knew about him, which was that he was the only person in her life right now who had the means and the character to possibly help her, and she was going to have to swallow a significant amount of pride and go ask. She drove over on a Tuesday afternoon. The excuse she used, to herself and to him, was a casserole dish she had borrowed 3 months ago and kept forgetting to return. She put the dish on the passenger seat and drove the half-mile down the dirt road and turned in at his gate. His ranch was not fancy. That had always struck her, in the time she had been over there for one neighborly reason or another. He had the money to make it nicer. Everyone in the county knew the Hargrove operation was solid, but he spent his money on the things that made the ranch work, not on the things that made it look impressive. The barn was big and well kept. The house was small and clean. The porch had 2 chairs that had been out there so long they had settled into permanent dents in the wood. He was coming out of the barn when she pulled in, wiping his hands on a rag, and he raised one hand in the easy greeting of someone who has never been in a hurry a day in his life. He said her name. She said his. She handed him the casserole dish and then just stood there, and whatever she had planned to say next went completely out of her head. Cole looked at her for a moment. Not in a prying way, just the way he looked at things, with patience, like he was willing to wait for whatever came next. He said, "You want to come sit on the porch?" She said yes. They sat in the two old chairs and he brought out 2 mugs of coffee without asking if she wanted any, because it was cold and it was obvious, and that was the kind of practical kindness Cole Hargrove had always operated on. Nora wrapped both hands around the mug and looked out at his pasture and told herself she was going to say the words she had practiced. She said them. She laid the whole thing out. The bank note, Ray Pruitt, the 30 days, her mother's situation, the math that didn't work. She spoke in a flat, factual tone, the way she had practiced, like she was describing someone else's problem. She told him she understood this was a large thing to ask. She told him she was not asking for love. She was asking for a legal arrangement that would give her access to his credit and allow her to refinance the note, and that she would be a fair and contributing partner, and that they could put whatever terms they wanted on paper. She did not look at him while she said it. She looked at the pasture. When she finished, there was a long quiet, not an uncomfortable one, just the kind of quiet that Cole seemed to carry around with him naturally, like it was part of his character. Nora counted the fence posts in the far field to keep her hands from shaking. He said, "All right." She turned to look at him. He was looking at the pasture too. She said, "All right," as in yes. He said, "Yes." She waited for the but. There was no but. He picked up his coffee mug and took a sip like the matter was settled, and Nora felt the shakiness move from her hands up into her chest, and she did not know what to do with that, so she looked back at the fence posts. "I'll need to talk to my lawyer," he said after a while. "Get the paperwork in order. Should be able to have something by end of week if we move quick." "Okay," she said. "You want more coffee?" She almost laughed. "Sure," she said. He went inside to get it, and Nora sat on his porch in the October afternoon and tried to figure out what had just happened. She had gone over there with a plan. The plan had worked. She should feel relieved. She did feel relieved, but underneath the relief there was something else, something small and warm and confusing that she decided, firmly, she would not think about right now. They were married 11 days later at the county clerk's office. Dot wore her blue dress, the one she saved for special occasions, and she cried through the whole thing in the way of someone who is not entirely sure what she is celebrating, but knows it is important. A neighbor named Patsy brought a lemon cake and set it up on the little table in the waiting room, and the clerk, a woman named Linda who had known everyone involved for 20 years, sniffed once, and very professionally did not comment on how short the engagement had been. Cole wore a pressed shirt. He held his hat in front of him with both hands. When the clerk asked if he took Nora to be his wife, he said, "I do," in the same tone he used for everything. Steady, clear, like a man who means what he says and has already thought carefully about whether he means it. Nora said her words too. She said them looking straight ahead, the way you look when you are reading something off a teleprompter that you have memorized. She did not cry. She had decided she was not going to cry. After, they had cake in the waiting room, and Dot held Cole's hand and told him she was very glad he was going to be around, and Cole said he was glad too, and there was something about the gentleness in his voice when he said it that made Nora have to look at the cake very intently for a moment. She had written up a document. She was proud of the document. It outlined the arrangement clearly: shared finances for the purposes of the refinance, separate lives conducted with mutual respect, a review of the situation in 12 months. She had stayed up late getting the language right. Cole had signed it at the kitchen table the following morning without reading past the first page, and when she pointed this out, he said, "I trust you, Nora," and went out to start his morning chores. She stared at the signed document for a moment. Then she put it in a folder and filed it, because she did not know what else to do with it. Moving into Cole's house was strange in the small, particular way that sharing space with another person is always strange. His house was clean but spare. He had very little on the walls: one photograph of his parents, a calendar from the feed company, and a small wooden cross above the kitchen door that had probably been there since the house was built. He had a good collection of books, which surprised her, stacked on shelves in the living room with no particular order: history, a lot of Western novels, some poetry, a few thick biographies of people she had never heard of, She brought her things over in 3 trips. He had cleared out the second bedroom for her, moved his extra equipment to the barn, put fresh sheets on the bed. There was a small vase on the dresser with 2 dried wildflowers in it. She stood there looking at it and could not decide if it was a deliberate gesture or just something he had forgotten was there. She did not ask. The first week was polite and careful, the way things are when 2 people are still measuring the space between them. He made breakfast early because he started work early, and he always made enough for 2 without comment, and there would be a plate kept warm on the back of the stove when she came out at 7. She started doing the dishes every evening, and she reorganized the pantry because the system made no sense. And Cole came home one afternoon, looked at the new arrangement, and nodded once like it was a reasonable decision, which she supposed it was. Every morning before she left for school, she stopped by her mother's house, which was only half a mile down the road, to check on Dot and get her settled for the day. A woman from town named Carol came in weekday mornings to sit with Dot, and Nora paid her out of the refinanced budget, and this, just this, felt like being able to breathe again. Knowing that someone was with her mother, knowing the house was safe, she slept better than she had in 2 years. She noticed this after about a week and did not know what to make of it. Her life was complicated and uncertain in ways that had not changed, but something had shifted. She lay in the dark in the second bedroom, and she could not name what it was, and eventually she just let it be. Cole was quieter than she had expected, in the way of people whose quiet is not emptiness but content. He did not fill silence for the sake of it. He said things when he had something to say, and at mealtimes they talked about ordinary things. The weather, the cattle, how Dot was doing, small items from around the county that one of them had heard. It was easy in a way that Nora had not expected, and the fact that it was easy made her quietly suspicious of herself. About 3 weeks in, she found him one afternoon sitting on Dot's back porch with her mother, just the 2 of them, in the thin winter sunshine. Dot was talking. She could not tell about what from the distance, and Cole was listening with his whole body, the way he did, turned slightly toward her, nodding. At some point Dot said something and Cole laughed. A real laugh, quiet and genuine. And Dot laughed too, and the sound of it reached Nora where she stood in the yard, and she had to stand still for a moment and breathe through her nose. When Dot was having bad days, the days when the fog came down thick and she got confused about where she was or what year it was, Cole had a particular way of handling it. He would not argue with her, he would not correct her, he would just sit near her and talk in that low, steady voice about nothing in particular. The weather, the old days, the way the land looked this time of year, and somehow, more often than not, Dot would settle. Nora had been doing this for 2 years, and she still sometimes got it wrong, still sometimes tried to pull her mother back to reality when what she needed was just company. Cole seemed to understand it without being told. Nora watched him do it and felt something she had no good word for. One evening she found a book on the kitchen counter that had not been there that morning. It was a small collection of poems by a Texas poet she had mentioned once. Once, in a passing sentence, months ago at Patsy's kitchen table, that she had loved in college and never found a copy of. She picked it up. There were several bookmarks already in it, little strips of paper marking different pages. She looked at the bookmarks for a while. Then she set the book down carefully and went and stood at the kitchen window and looked at the darkening yard and thought about a lot of things she had been very successfully not thinking about. Cole came in from the barn about 20 minutes later, smelling of the outdoors and hay, and she did not say anything about the book, and neither did he. He washed his hands and asked if she wanted eggs for supper or the leftover stew. She said stew was fine. He heated it up. They ate. But she took the book to bed with her, and she read it until late. The moment everything changed, or rather, the moment she could no longer pretend it hadn't already been changing, came from Patsy. Of course it did. Patsy had been friends with both of them for years, was completely without the social instinct that tells most people when to hold something back, and had apparently been sitting on an enormous amount of information for an enormous amount of time. It was a Saturday in December. Nora had stopped by to drop off a pie for Patsy's husband's birthday, and somehow ended up sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, and somehow Patsy started talking. She mentioned, as if it were a casual fact, that Cole had turned down a contract to manage a bigger operation up near Lubbock back when he was 26. Good money, more land, a real step up. He had turned it down, Patsy said, because that was the summer Nora's father had his first heart episode, and Cole had not wanted Nora to come home from wherever she was at the time and find that the person who had always been on the other side of the fence line was gone. Nora set down her coffee mug. Patsy kept going. She mentioned the cards that had arrived every year on the anniversary of Nora's father's death, the ones Nora had always assumed came from one of her mother's church friends. They came from Cole. He had sent them every year for 11 years without signing his name. Patsy mentioned the way Cole had shown up at the grain co-op the week after Dennis left and bought a year's worth of feed from Nora's father-in-law at full price, no negotiation, when every other buyer in the county was taking the man apart. She mentioned that he had done this quietly and told no one, and that she only knew because the co-op manager's wife had been in her prayer group. She mentioned the day Cole had heard through someone that Nora had been offered a teaching job in San Antonio after Dennis left, and that he had gone home and apparently spent the whole evening on his porch not moving, and that his ranch hand at the time had asked if he was okay, and that Cole had said yes and gone to bed. Nora had turned the job down because of Dot. Cole had not known she would. By the time Patsy stopped talking, eventually because someone came to the door, Nora was sitting very still with her hands flat on the table. "How long have you known all this?" she asked. Patsy shrugged. "Long time. People talk. I listen." "Does he know that you know?" "Lord, no. You know Cole. He'd be mortified." She looked at Nora with the direct and unsentimental gaze of a woman who has lived a long time and watched people miss things they should not have missed. "I thought you should know," she said simply. "I thought it was time." Nora drove home slowly. Very slowly. She sat in the truck in Cole's driveway for a long time, looking at the house where the lights were on in the kitchen, where he was probably doing the crossword or reading or some other quiet evening thing, and she thought about 17 years of small, consistent, completely unexplained acts. The firewood, the cards, the Lubbock contract, the co-op, the poetry book on the kitchen counter. She went inside and she made dinner, and she was very normal about it. She did not say anything. Neither did he. She was not ready. She needed to sit with what she had learned and let it settle, the way you sit with something enormous that has landed on you and you are not yet sure it is safe to move. But that night she took the poetry book off the nightstand and she read the pages where he had put the bookmarks, and they were the pages with the poems she had loved most, the ones she would have chosen herself. And she lay back against the pillow in the dark and stared at the ceiling and said, very quietly, to nobody, "Oh." The conversation, when it came, happened the way important things often happen, not in the setting you would have designed for it, but in the most ordinary one. He was walking the east fence line the following evening, the way he did every day at that time, checking the posts and the wire, slow and methodical. She went out to him. She told herself she just needed some air. She walked along beside him for a while. The land was getting dark at the edges, the sky that particular deep blue that comes right before full dark in a Texas winter. They walked the way they often walked together on the property, side by side, comfortable in silence, which was itself something she had stopped taking for granted. She asked him if it was true. About Lubbock. He stopped walking. He stood there with one hand on a fence post, looking out at the far edge of his land, and she waited. "Patsy," he said. It was not a question. "Yes." He nodded slowly, like this was something he had always expected would happen eventually, and had made a kind of peace with. She asked him why he had stayed, why he had never said anything, why he had done all of it, the firewood and the cards and all of it, without ever once giving her a way to know. He was quiet for a moment, not the stalling kind of quiet, the thinking kind. He said that when he had realized, that summer when she was 19 and he was 23, that she was the person he wanted to spend his life near, he had understood pretty clearly that he was not the ending she was writing for herself. She was bright, and she had plans, and she was going somewhere. He did not know exactly where, but it was somewhere forward, somewhere more, and he was a man who was rooted here, in this dirt, in this county, with his father's cattle and his grandfather's land, and he did not think he was the kind of thing that fit into her story. So he had not said anything, he told her. He had stayed close because he could not do otherwise. He had helped when he could because it cost him nothing to help, and it gave him something he could not easily name to know she was okay. He said he had watched her marry Dennis, and he would not tell her what that had been like, but he said it had been his own business to deal with, and he had dealt with it. He said that when she had come to him with the proposal, her practical, organized, document-ready proposal, his first thought had been that the universe had a very particular sense of humor. His second thought had been yes. "I should have said something years ago," he said quietly. "I know that. I just didn't think I had the right." Nora looked at him standing there in the near dark with his hand on the fence post. This man she had known her whole life and somehow not seen, and she thought about all the years of careful, invisible love, and she felt something in her chest that was large and warm and a little painful, the way feelings are when they have been kept in a small space for too long and finally have room to expand. She asked him what he thought now, about the right. He looked at her for the first time in the whole conversation. His face, in that light, was very open, the way faces are when people have stopped performing and are just being exactly what they are. "Now?" he said. "Well, now you already signed the paperwork." It was a joke. It was not much of a joke, but from Cole it might as well have been stand-up comedy, and Nora made a sound that was half laugh and half something else, and before she had entirely decided to, she had stepped toward him, and he was already there. They stood in the cold at the edge of his east fence line with the last of the Texas sky going dark above them, and it was nothing like the love stories that start with butterflies and first glances. It was better than that. It was the kind of thing that has been built slowly, out of real materials, by someone who knows what they are doing. The months that followed were ordinary and good. That is the truest way to put it. The refinance went through without trouble. The banknote on Dot's farm was restructured on terms that Nora actually understood and could manage. She found out later, much later, when she happened to look at the paperwork carefully, that Cole had quietly arranged for a portion of the debt to be absorbed into a joint account he had funded, without telling her. She brought this up. He said it was easier that way. She said that was not the point. He said he knew, and he looked at her with that patient, open expression, and she decided that some arguments were not worth having. Dot enrolled in a day program in town 3 mornings a week, a place with big windows and a garden out back, and a woman named Rita who ran the music hour and who Dot had developed an immediate and complete trust in. On the mornings when Dot came home from the program, she was more like herself, a little lighter, a little more present. Nora had not known how much isolation had been weighing on her mother until some of it was lifted. Nora started teaching reading workshops at the county library on Tuesday afternoons. She had not planned to. The librarian had called looking for a volunteer, and Nora had said yes before she thought it through, and then she had walked into that room full of adults who were learning to read properly for the first time, or learning again after years away from it, and she had come home that evening and told Cole about it with more feeling than she had used to talk about anything in a long time. He had listened, leaning against the kitchen counter with his arms folded, and he had said, "There it is." She asked what he meant. He said she had that look she got when she was doing exactly the right thing. She asked how he knew what that looked like. He said he had been watching for years, and he knew. It was the most words he had said in one go in a while, and she stood there looking at him, and then she laughed, because what else do you do? Cole's mornings were still early and full of work. Nora was still the one who managed the paperwork and the finances and the scheduling, because she was better at it, and it made her feel like she was contributing something, which she needed. They had developed a rhythm that felt less like an arrangement and more like a life. On winter evenings, when the work was done and Dot was settled at her own house for the night, they sat in the living room. He read. She read. The wood stove made a sound like a low conversation. Sometimes one of them would say something and the other would answer, and sometimes half an hour would go by without either of them speaking, and it was comfortable in the way that only a few kinds of silence ever are. One evening she picked up the poetry book and read a poem out loud. Not dramatically, just reading. the way you read something to someone when you want to share it. He set down his own book and listened. When she finished, he said it was a good one. She asked if he had a favorite in the collection. He said yes, and told her which one, and she flipped to it and read it too. And he was right. It was a good one. They talked about it for a while, the way people talk about things that matter to them, and it was easy, and it was real. It struck her sometimes, in these moments, how much of her life she had spent braced, always ready for the next hard thing, always managing, always keeping the structure from collapsing. She had been so busy holding everything together that she had not noticed, until now, what it felt like to set some of it down. Cole had never asked her to set anything down. He had just made it easier to. He had just been steady, the way the land was steady, the way the seasons were steady, consistent and reliable and undemanding, and there when she needed it. She thought about that sometimes, about what it means to love someone the way he had loved her, without strategy, without expectation, without any guarantee of return. She had spent her adult life being practical about love, measuring it against what it cost and what it gave back. And here was this man who had simply loved her for 17 years because that was the truth of him, and he had not asked for a thing. There is a particular kind of person in the world, not common but real, who loves steadily and without performance, who shows up not because it is noticed, but because showing up is what they do. Cole Hargrove was that kind of person. Nora had known him her whole life, and it had taken her the better part of 2 decades to understand what she was looking at. Spring came slowly that year. The pasture went green by degrees, the way it always did, a little more each week. Nora stood at the kitchen window one morning with her coffee and watched Cole moving through the field with his dogs at his heels, checking something near the far gate, and she thought about the night she had sat at her mother's kitchen table with a stack of bills and no plan, and how she had driven to him because she had run out of other options. She was glad she had run out of options. It is a strange thing to be grateful for your own worst moment, but she was. If she had not been desperate, she might have waited another 17 years. She might have gone her whole life and never known. The thought of it made something in her go very quiet. Dot had a good morning that day. She remembered the names of all her grandchildren. She remembered the year she was married, and the color of her wedding dress, and the name of the song that had been playing. She sat in her kitchen chair in the sunshine coming through the window, and she told Nora about the early days on the farm, the way it had been when her husband was young and strong, and the whole future was still ahead of them. And Nora sat across from her and listened, and did not look at the clock. Cole came by later that afternoon, bringing a portion of stew he said he had made too much of. He sat with Dot for 20 minutes, while Nora sorted some paperwork in the next room, and she could hear the low murmur of his voice, and her mother's laughter, and the particular quiet of 2 people who were simply glad to be near each other. She stood in the hallway and listened and thought, this is it. This is what she had been trying to protect by coming up with a plan and writing documents and managing everything so carefully. Not the house, not the property, not the refinanced mortgage. This, her mother's laughter, this particular afternoon, the ordinary goodness of it. And somehow, in trying to protect it, she had found something she had not even known she was looking for. People ask sometimes, what made it work? If they had known the beginning, the practical proposal, the signed document, the careful arrangement, they might expect some dramatic turning point, some big romantic moment where everything became clear. But it was not like that. It was smaller and realer than that. It was the plate kept warm on the back of the stove. It was the way he had learned which mugs she preferred without being told. It was finding, one morning, that he had fixed the sticky drawer in the kitchen that she had mentioned once, weeks ago, in passing. It was the way he stood aside at the door without making it a gesture, just making it space. It was the 17 years of small, consistent proof of who he was, and the fact that she could now read that proof clearly, and she understood every word. Nora was not the kind of person who said things easily. She had spent a long time being the capable one, the one who managed, and capable people sometimes mistake managing for living. But she had learned something this year. In this house, with this man, in this slow and ordinary and very good life, that she thought she might be learning too late, but was determined to be grateful for anyway. She said it to him one evening on the porch, in the summer heat, when the sun was going down and the sky was the color of something she could not name, and she said it plainly, without building up to it, the way he said things. She said that she loved him. She said she thought she probably always had, in some form, even when she did not know that was what it was. She said she was sorry it had taken her so long to say it out loud. Cole was quiet for a moment, in his way. Then he said, "You're here now." And that was enough. That was, in fact, everything. Because that is the thing about a love that has been patient for a long time. When it finally lands, it does not arrive with dramatics. It arrives like something that has always been there. Like firewood on a cold morning. Like a porch light left on. Like a book of poems handed over without comment, marked at all the right pages, waiting for the moment when you are finally ready to read it together.